Human Rights Watch urges Lebanon to swiftly reform laws governing the country's domestic workers in a bid to limit cases of abuse. It is also asking the government, which announced it would open an investigation into the beating and suicide of Ethiopian domestic worker Alim Deshesa Desisa, to reveal the outcome of the probe. In a video released by LBC last week, Deshesa Desisa was seen moaning as a man later identified as Ali Mahfouz, aided by another man, beat and forced her into a car outside the Ethiopian consulate. 2 days later, she committed suicide at the Psychiatric de la Croix hospital. The incident outside the consulate drew wide condemnation of the government's inaction by civil rights groups, who also cited a culture of impunity when it comes to the abuse of domestic workers in Lebanon. And joining us now to discuss the prevailing human rights issues in Lebanon is Nadim Houry. Houry is Human Rights Watch Deputy Director of its Middle East and North Africa Division, and he is Director of the Beirut office. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, Lebanon voted in the favor of the International Labour Organization's Convention number 189, and I'm reading this, on decent work for domestic workers. This was adopted in June of 2011, but has not yet been implemented.
No, it's not. It hasn't implemented it, but it hasn't even amended its labor law to include domestic workers. Domestic workers today are unprotected in Lebanon. Their only legal document is a contract, the standard contract that they sign in Arabic. And frankly, we all know now, after years of work by us, but also by many others, documenting the problems that we're seeing, is that the situation is abysmal. And the latest example is what happened to Alim Deshesa Desisa, which is, it's a tragic story. I mean, what's even more tragic is that it could have been avoided. But it hasn't been avoided because the Lebanese state refuses to take the measures that are required. And those are things like changing the law, getting rid of this sponsorship kafala system, which really creates slavery-like conditions today in Lebanon for many workers. And I'm not saying here all the employers are bad, but the system is bad and creates vulnerabilities.
Why do you think they abuse these domestic workers? Is it a cultural issue, as they said?
I think there are two things. I mean, one, there's an issue. Like everything in Lebanon, it's an unregulated part of our interaction. So some people take advantage of this. So we see workers working, for example, 7 days a week, or they consider that a day off is a day that she spends with the family, but that's not a really day off.
So what is Human Rights Watch doing to solve or to raise awareness, other than using the media, different media outlets to raise awareness on the issue? Sure. What are you implementing for Lebanon specifically in terms of domestic workers?
Our job is really to remind the Lebanese state that they have to do things. What we've tried to do is to document it systematically. We did a study, for example, in 2007, 2008 on death rate of domestic workers, and we found an average of 1 case per week, documented by name, date, and incident. Most of them committing suicide or dying while trying to escape. We did a study of how the judicial system in Lebanon is dealing with complaints by domestic workers, but also against domestic workers. And we found a lot of problems there as well. Shortfalls, lack of lawyers, no translation, pretrial detentions for very long times. And now we're again trying to spotlight, in collaboration with many local NGOs, that this issue needs to end. I mean, Lebanon needs to realize that increasing number of countries are banning workers from coming to Lebanon.
Right, and Lebanon had this last year. I believe it was Ethiopian, Filipinas,
Nepalis,
Sri Lanka,
and Madagascar now, yeah.
Okay.
And they haven't lifted it, and I think it's time for us to realize the system is not working. You hear a lot of Lebanese families complain that the system is not working, that they have to rely on agents. I mean, this is not, modern day slavery. Why do we have to go through, this whole structure of agents and fees and sort of sponsorship and controlling someone's passport? Khalas, I think that the time is now to say, let's move to a system that protects domestic workers, and a system that protects domestic workers is not going to only be better for domestic workers, it's also going to make the life of employers much easier. I mean, the amount of complaints that we hear from employers, but I always tell them, but at least you have a choice. You can terminate the contract. For most domestic workers, they do not have that choice.
Did Ali Mahfouz get arrested?
He did not get arrested. I mean, that's the other thing as well. I mean,
he didn't kill her, but he abused her.
So, and it's not a question of, I guess the first issue is impunity. And yes, he did not kill her, and it's not maybe the most severe case of beatings or abuse that we've seen. On the other hand, I mean, we all saw the video, the ease with which someone today can physically abuse a worker, a migrant worker, on the street and not be troubled. I mean, after the media focus, the state launched an investigation. Well, now what we're calling for today is what happened to this investigation. We need to know, because unfortunately in this country, when there's a media spotlight on something, everyone talks about it.
Right,
the state says we're opening an investigation, we're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
We know that they did send a forensic doctor to visit Alim when she was at the Deir Salib hospital. But now, khalas, they moved on to something else. And our job is to remind them.
She was also unstable, right? I mean, for everybody watching us, the Le Croix Hospital is a psychiatric ward.
Look,
so she was mentally unstable and she was not responding to him. Yeah. But it gives him no right, you're saying, to treat her the way that he did.
I think there are two things. Of course, nothing can ever justify a human being beating another human being. But also there's another fundamental question that needs to be asked, which is, what is driving so many migrant workers to commit suicide in Lebanon? Some people say, oh, they're crazy. That's crazy talk, frankly. There's a systemic issue here that is driving a lot of women to despair, a lot of migrant women to despair in Lebanon. When we started looking into this, we realized that there are actually 5 Ethiopian women today in Deir Salib who were transferred there at the La Croix Hospital, who were transferred there from the General Security Retention Facility to there. I mean, you have to imagine, these are people who are coming to Lebanon. They often don't even know they're coming to Lebanon. They think they may be going to the Khalij, to the UAE, or to another country. When they come here, they don't understand, and they're put in a household. And because they don't understand, often the first few days don't go well. So the employer is frustrated, they scream at her. If things don't go well, in the case of Alim's case, she had only been in Lebanon for 2.5 months. The employers were frustrated, they would send her back to the agent would beat her. Right. The second time, the agent beat her to force her to go back and work. And these are also often people coming with debts. She had to incur a debt to travel to Lebanon, and she hadn't been paid after 2.5 months. So, I think it's too easy to say she was unstable. There obviously was maybe a mental health issue, but I think there's a systemic issue here that we need to probe and that we need the Lebanese state to start looking into it.
Speaking of the Lebanese state, I'm going to just shift the focus and end on the Syrian refugees in this country. So far, I believe, is it over 7,000 refugees registered now?
Correct. So there are 7,000 that are registered with the Lebanese High Relief Council and UNHCR, but there are actually many, many more, because they're not registering, for example, the refugees who are present in the Bekaa. Today they're focusing most of the registration in the Wadi Khalid area and Tripoli. They're not registering as well. There are around 70 families near the Car border, on the other side of the general security checkpoint, but on Lebanese territory. Those are not being registered.
Is the government helping this?
They're helping in the north. They're helping in the north. Could they do more? Yes, they can definitely do more. We want to see more being done in the Bekaa, but also we want guarantees from the state for the protection of these workers, of these refugees. We saw that last year there were a few arrests for Syrians simply for being here illegally, when everyone knows if they're coming here illegally, it's not to bypass Lebanese securities, because they cannot cross legitimate Syrian crossing borders because they would be arrested. This problem remains an issue. It has been dealt with in a typical Lebanese ad hoc manner, but many of the Syrian refugees we've interviewed are afraid. They're afraid of being detained and deported back to Syria.
Just on the last note, can you tell me what the government can do to help alleviate the situation right now?
I think, one, we need to have here a public commitment that all Syrians who are here, even if they've entered illegally, will be treated as refugees, will be welcomed in Lebanon. They will not be detained. We want to see better coordination and aid in the Bekaa. And thirdly, we just want to, we want the Syrians to be able to move around Lebanon freely, the same way when Lebanese used to flee to Syria during our civil war or during the Israeli 2006 war, that they were able to move freely.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.